Hey, welcome to a tutorial on web components. So this right here is a component and I've got a few buttons here. The ones that are working now is the previous and next, and every time I click on the next button, I get some user details here, the image, the name, age, and a few other details here. And if I keep clicking like that, I can cycle through the data that is available. Okay, so this right here is a single component there. And if we take a look at the source code here, we have an index page, and that web component is simply this line right here. So it's just one component like this, which contains everything here. Okay, and these are the buttons down here, which are not part of the component. It's just this displays the name, the age, address, and image. And then we have a script down here from JavaScript that allows us to populate information in here directly. All right, and then we've got an actual JavaScript file that describes how the component itself functions. So this is it right here. That's where we're going to be spending the bulk of the tutorial. And then we have some data on the server, which is the data that we are cycling through in JSON format. Okay, so let's begin and see how we can create a web component like this. Now, the advantage of this is that of doing things this way and creating components is that you can reuse this. So I can use this on any other project and it will look exactly the same with the same styles and everything here. So all I need to do is to just grab the JavaScript file, load it in a new project, and then go to the index page and create an element like this one. Once I do that, then I'll have the component, and once I add some data here, it's going to display just like this. All right, so to begin, make sure you have a text editor of some kind. I'm using Sublime Text for mine. And then the second thing is make sure you have a server running on your system. You can do that. If you don't already have a server running, you can do that by downloading XAMPP. And then once you install it, you can run the control panel and make sure you click Start on the Apache system. So make sure Apache is running and make sure MySQL is also running. So start these two processes and we're ready to go. And then the other thing obviously is you're going to need a browser. So load up your browser and then go to your htdocs folder. Inside XAMPP htdocs, create a folder called web comps. And then I'm going to bring this folder over here so we can easily add files without having to go to the folder. All right. Now, a little bit of a disclaimer for web components. Don't go crazy using these web components because not all browsers support them. However, all modern browsers mostly do support web components. But just to be safe, you can limit their use. It's only a good idea to use web components when you know the clients that you're dealing with will have the modern browsers. If you have a lot of mobile device users, then I would suggest you don't use web components that often if it's a serious website. However, for things like, let's say you're creating a point of sale for a client, it's okay to use web components because you are going to provide the browser that they're going to use in order to run their app. I've done this before, so it works really well. All right. Or if you're hired by an organization to make a software for a particular purpose, then you know they're going to have to use the latest browsers, and that is okay. But when you don't have control over your customers, then it's not a good idea. All right, so I want to create two pages. Let me close this. Just right click on web comp here, create new, and then let's create another new one. So let me save this in this folder. So the first one will be index.php. This will represent our actual website. And then the other one will represent our file, like the element, right? So what I want to create here is just an element that displays user info. So you can do you can create all kinds of elements, components using this system, but let's do something simple. It seems it's easier to do the user one. So I'm just going to call this file user.js. Maybe I can do user.comp.js just so I know it's a component. So save that. So the way this thing is going to work is that we're going to create a component in JavaScript, and so every time you want to use it, you're going to have to load this file. So let me explain why you actually need components sometimes. So let's add some HTML here. For example, I'm going to call this one comps, like so. Now, keep in mind, if, for example, I put an input like so, and then input, I'm going to define a type and say text like that, okay? And then if I have a value here, like so, I'm going to say some value, right? Like that, okay? So this is standard stuff. So I'm going to load this by typing localhost/comps webcomps. I think that's what I named it. /index, right? So this is an input right here. Standard stuff. Now the thing is, if for example you want to display information for a user, okay, you're going to follow a similar kind of system. Let me put a break tag here. You put a div here, but then in that div you're going to put an image tag like so. Put your source, maybe image.jpg, something like that, and then after that you put a break tag, and then you put maybe another div and put their name in there, and so on, you know. And then by the end of the day, you're going to build something that resembles what you want. Now, the thing is, sometimes you may design something so elaborate that there's too much code involved there. And then simply when you want to display that information, you have to load that code and then repeat it over and over and over here if there are many versions of the same thing you want to do. What would be nice instead is to simply have one element called maybe something like user data or something like this. Okay, open and close that user data, something like that. And then all I need to do here is just add some attributes like name is equal to whatever the name is, and then maybe age is equal to whatever the age is. Okay, and so on. Maybe address, something like that, and then you add your address there, something like that. And then once I show this, instead of, because this is not a valid element here in HTML, if I refresh like this, you won't see it here. You are seeing this name because these are divs that are actually recognizable, but this one, it doesn't know what to do with this. However, it would be nice if just this one thing represented all this commotion in here. Whatever I wanted to type in here, all the the event listeners, every data, the images, all of it can be encapsulated into one thing, and then all I need to do is type something like that, and then it will display all the data that I need without much hassle. So that's why you may need web components to simplify your workflow. And then the second reason why you'd need a web components is because styling issues. So let's say I create all this stuff here. I'm going to put some CSS here. Maybe I'll have some styles over here like that. Okay. So once I add some styles, let's say I have styles for a div, and then, or maybe I put class names for this. Now, if for some reason in another project that I bring this, there's a similar class with the same class name that exists here, it's going to change how my component looks like, because styles go everywhere. They bleed into one another. So if I have a similar class, or maybe I styled a div in a particular way, wherever I paste this in a project that already has, let's say, styles for divs, then this component will look very different from how I designed it. But with custom elements like this, or custom components, you don't have that issue, because what a component contains is both HTML and CSS combined inside here, and even JavaScript. Okay, so a component, what it does is it gets the JavaScript, the CSS, and the HTML and wraps it inside one container, and it's not affected by what happens outside the project. So if I get this component and drop it in another project, regardless what the CSS is in there, the HTML and the JavaScript is, it won't matter, because the component will work exactly the same and look exactly the same. So this might be a reason to use components, because they are reusable. This makes them very reusable. So the next time a client comes to you and says, I want you to design a profile page for me, since you already have this that displays user data, you're just going to copy this line and then get your user comp file, put it in there, and you're ready to go. So let's see how we can achieve this kind of magic. So let's come here and let me remove all this that I have done so far. I'll leave the style tag there for now. And so I want to create this thing called user data. So I've added a few properties here. So I'm going to call this, I'm going to add some actual data in here. And then I'm going to add some address of some kind, something like this. Anything, well, it's just data. So now I want my HTML to recognize this as an actual item. Just like if I had added input like this, it knows what to do with that information, right? So I want it to know what to do with this. So I have a list of functions we're going to be using here that will lead to us creating our component. So here we have this one, custom elements.define. This is what defines the actual custom element. And then there's this function called connected callback, which runs every time this component is connected in the DOM. This one acts when there is a disconnection. And then we're going to have something that is called the shadow DOM, because as you know, this index page right here contains what is called a DOM. So the DOM is just the document object model, and this describes how these items in here are related. For example, HTML has an opening and closing tag, but inside here there's a head tag. So this head is a child of HTML, and title here is a child of head. So this organization of child-parent system is called the DOM. So now what happens is with custom elements or components, they've got what is called a shadow DOM, a DOM of itself. Each component has a DOM of itself, just like this whole system here. That is why once you start using that DOM, it doesn't affect the styles. It doesn't get affected by the styles from outside because they are inside a different DOM. So you're going to see how that works. And then we've got this attribute change callback. So this attribute change is a function that will run every time any of these is edited. So every time somebody edits this using JavaScript per se, for example, then that callback is going to be called, and then you can do some stuff with that. And then there's this function here called, a static variable here called observed attributes. All right, it's actually a function. So what this function does is you tell it which of these attributes to monitor for a change. So whenever they change, it's going to trigger and inform, the component that something in there has changed. And then once something has changed, so if somebody comes in here and deletes this name, it's going to know the name was deleted. Okay, so yeah. So let's see how we can go about doing any of this. Okay, now I'm going to avoid using this JavaScript file for now because I want you to see how we can define these things down here. Okay, so JavaScript obviously has to go below the component because we want the component to be available by the time we're running our JavaScript. So I'm going to run my script here. I'll put some script tags here, but this is only temporal. We're going to do this in a separate file much later. So what I want to use is a class. So in order to create a component, you create a class. So I'm going to create a class. I'm going to call this class user. Now I can't use a hyphen here, so I have to use a capital letter just so it resembles the actual component there. And then what I will do now is open and close brackets like this, and then I need to create a constructor like so. So constructor like that with its brackets, and then like so. Okay, then once I come down here now, all I need to do is define this as an actual item. So I'm going to say window dot. So make sure the declaration is after you create the class. If you put this on top there, it's not going to work. So window dot custom elements dot define. So I want to define a custom element. So here the name of the custom element is user data. And then what class is responsible for this? It's user data. Okay. So I am simply telling it that whenever it sees this inside the DOM, it's going to assume that I'm referring to this class right here. So I'm making a connection between the two. Okay, so this is all I actually need to do here. Now, since this is a function right there, I can simply add an alert here just to tell me what is going on. Or maybe I do a console.log and just say here, showing that we did get to that point, right? So let me come back here and refresh my page, which contains nothing at this point. And if I do right click, inspect the element, go to my console, I'm going to see this text here that says, here, we did make it. The only problem is we have an error here. So let's see what this error is all about anyway. It says custom element constructor returned a wrong element. So what it's complaining about is that we need to extend an actual element because this user data, it doesn't know what to make of this. So what we need to do is extend another class. So we're going to say extends, and then let's extend another class which is called HTML element. Now there are many classes you can extend here. For example, if you want to extend the functionality of an input element, you can extend the input element instead of just a general HTML element, right? Because this is more general. And so you can be very specific. You can choose to extend a button if you want to extend its functionality and so on. So once I do the extension there, let me refresh my page. And I still get here, but then it says reference error, must call super constructor before using this. Okay, so no problem. What it is saying here is that I must type the word super, like so, open and close bracket. So you may be wondering, why am I forced to run this? Well, what super does is that it runs the parent, because what I'm doing here is I'm inheriting properties from this HTML element into this class. So basically, whatever functionality is in here, I can now access in here. That's why I'm extending this one. But now I need to run the constructor, this, because every class has a constructor function inside it. So here I'm running the constructor for this, but the problem is the items in this one have not been initialized to begin working. So in order to initialize them, this is why I have to run this super. The super will run the constructor for this one. So hopefully that's not too confusing, but just know that you must type this one every time, otherwise you do get an error. So let's come back here and refresh. Let's see if there are no complaints anymore. And as you can see now, there are no complaints anymore. We are here and everything seems to be working fine. Okay, that is all right. So now how do we deal with things here? What do we do next? Well, now we can create some HTML and put it inside this issue here. So here what I can do is just come here and say something like let's create some HTML. So I'm just going to say this dot I don't know, I'm going to call it HTML, or maybe that's too common. I'm just going to call it .data is equal to. Now, since this is a class, the moment I say this dot some value, then I am setting a value inside this class. So if I say this dot data is equal to, and then I set it to some random value like this, it's going to save that information. Okay, so also remember that I can do this dot get attribute here. So for example, let's do that right here. I'm going to say console.log, and then I'm going to say this dot get attribute. So I'm going to get the attribute name there. So whatever the name is at that time, it's going to display it here in the console. So let me refresh, and you see that this is the name inside there. Now I can use that to display the actual name there. So instead of saying console.log, what I can say is I can say this dot inner HTML is equal to this dot get attribute name, like that. So now if I refresh, I do get my name there. Okay, now remember that if I do inspect this thing, the name is part of the attributes there. So name is equal to, so I can get any of these. I can get the age, the address, and so forth, right? So pretty easy. That's how you get the data from this into there. So I can just do the same for any of this. So what I will do instead is grab everything out there. So I'm going to say this dot name is equal to that, and then this dot age, I'm just setting these variables, and then this dot address, like that. And so I will change this to age and then address, like so. Okay, so now the thing is, I've gotten these items, and then now I'm displaying it inside the inner HTML. Okay, so that's well and good. But what happens now if for some reason I change this name? Let's say I'm loading data from the database, right? Usually what happens is, let's say I have an input like so. If I have a text input, I have text like so. And then what I do is I use JavaScript to run a software that when I click here, I change this type to a button. It's going to update immediately in real time. So let me put value here and say this is some text, right? So let's use that as an example. So I'm going to go back here and refresh. Now what I want to do is on the click event, I want this to change to a button. So to do that, I can easily do it by adding an event listener. Now instead of going through the trouble of that, I'm just going to add it here and say on click. I'm just going to run a function called change with the event given in there. So let me not disturb the script that we are running here. I'm going to create another script tag just to prove a point there, and I will say function change, like so. And then there I will put the E to represent the event. So let me come down here, and all I need to do is say e.target.type is equal to button, just like that. And just like that, it should change to a button. So let me refresh, and if I click on it, it changes to a button now. So this is now a button. Okay, that's what happens. But now let's see if I change an attribute here, if it's going to actually update. So in the same way, I want on the on click event, so when I click here, I'm just going to cut that and put it here, like so. Okay, so when I click here, I want this to change. I want to change this property right there. Now since we are displaying the value of this property, I want to see if it's actually going to update the view itself. So in order to change this property, we have to change a few things here. We'll say e.getAttribute, right? The attribute name is name. The reason we're using get attribute instead of directly .type is because these are custom made attributes. They're not really part of anything. Text type though is is an integral part of the input, this input element. So that's why you can go directly and say .type, .value, etc. or .inner HTML. But for the rest, you have to do get attribute. So now I want to change that name to button. So let me come back here and refresh. Okay. So if I now click on this, you will see that, oh, maybe I got an error. Cannot assign to a function call. Ooh, reference error. What did I do wrong? Anyway, the idea is that wait a minute, what happened here? Okay, whether I can't do this, let me see. Let me do an ID because I really want to prove this point here. So I'm going to change this ID to, I don't know, maybe 2, something like that. Then let's get the element by an ID. So I'm just going to say var element is equal to document, because I want to grab that thing, get element by, oh, let me use query selector. Why am I suffering? Query selector, and I'm going to use a hash, and what's the ID here? 2, something like so. So once I grab that, then I can say element dot, oh, sorry, that was my bad. I actually just needed to, sorry, I understand what was the problem now. Hey, you know, programming. This is why people rip their hair out. But the issue was I'm assigning to get element. I'm supposed to say set element instead of get element, because you can't assign something to a get. So it should be e.target.set attribute name, and then I have to put the value over here that I'm setting it to, which is button, like so. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's see what happens. Refresh and click. So now it looks like nothing happened, but something did happen. If we inspect this element right here, you see that the name is now button and not the original one. So if I refresh the page, you see that the name is set to that. But when I click this, just watch that part there. If I click, it changes to button. And yet the information here has not changed. And this is because this component did not recognize that something actually changed here, which might not be good because it doesn't make it work like an actual element here. So instead, we have to find a way to make it recognize whenever we change this, because it means new data has been loaded, so it has to refresh its view. So luckily, there are functions to do that. So this is where this now comes in, the this one right here. So I'm going to copy that and paste it right at the top here, like so. And let's just see to make sure that we haven't broken anything. I'm going to refresh, nothing, no errors, then we are good. So you have to write it like this: static get observed attributes, like so. This is just a function. And then inside here, you return an array containing the attributes you want to notice. So for example, I want this attribute noticed, so I'm going to put that name there. I want it to check for that as well whenever it changes. And then I can add one more, which is the address. So you can add as many as you want here. So all I'm doing here is telling it that every time any of these changes, please run a function. Now, what function will run when this happens? Well, it's conveniently called attribute changed. Okay, so there's observed attribute. Here it is. Attribute changed callback. That's the name of the function. It's like that. Attribute changed callback. So careful with the capitalization there. Now here you have to add these values here. So first of all, it's going to tell me what the old value was, and then it's going to show me what the new value is. Oh, yes, actually, the old value, the new value, and then the name of the attribute that was changed. So let's see if we can console.log everything here. So let's see console.log. First of all, we're going to log the name of the attribute, and then we're going to log the old value, and then we are going to log the new value, just like that. Okay, so let's come back here and refresh the page, and these are the values now that have happened. So it runs immediately because when you are loading the page, it's equal to a change. So it's going to tell me the old value, the name of the attribute here. The old value is null because there was no old value. The new value is this one, and so on. Now the reason it's running is because I'm actually setting wait a minute, no, I am not setting these. Yes, it has to set them whenever it makes a connection to the component. So this is why it runs immediately. So you can see that there's no for the old and new values, right? So let's clear the console here for a second, and then let me click on this. So once I click, you see these three values here. There's the name of the attribute, which is name, and then there's the old value, which was there, and then there's a new value that we've set in there. So all we need to do is tell it to update, because now it's noticing that something changed. So all I can do now is just get this dot name instead of getting it from this dot name. So this dot name was equal to the attribute that was already there, but what I want to do is change the inner HTML to match the new name. So all I need to do is put this code there, this dot inner HTML. This still refers to this item or this class. The class and this item are one and the same. So whenever you say this, you're referring to this class or this attribute. So this dot inner HTML is equal to this dot get attribute from the name, and put it there. So let's come back, let's refresh. If I now click on it, you see that it has changed. So this is how you can use AJAX to change the data of a component. So you can send a request using JavaScript to the database, get your information, bring it back, and then it's going to update in real time. Okay, so now we are done with these guys. Now there are a few other things to take note here. So before we go to connected and disconnected callbacks, let's deal with the shadow, because we've dealt with the rest of these items. Okay, so what exactly is the shadow? Like I mentioned, there's a DOM here going on, a model here going on. So let's imagine for a second we add some actual HTML. So instead of just setting this to a name, this dot inner HTML is equal to this. Now I don't need to get this attribute since I already got it here, so I can just say use this dot name, and it's going to be exactly the same thing because I already set it to this dot name, so I can use that. So click yes. Okay. Now what I need to do here is let's add some actual HTML. So what I can do is create another function here. So you can create as many functions as you want here. So I can say something like set or create HTML. This is a function right there, like so. So this will create the HTML. It's going to return. I'm just going to say var HTML is equal to some empty strings, like so, and then return the HTML at the end of the day. Oops, the thing got too excited there. Alrighty then, maybe this is not the best word to use for a variable, right? Let's use text instead, just to avoid problems. So create HTML. Okay, so here I'm just going to say, instead of this dot name, I'm just going to say it's equal to this dot create HTML, like so. Okay, so let's see if we get any errors there. Definitely no errors. Oh, wait a second. Okay, so I was wondering why it did that, but this .inner HTML here is the one that's updating with that name. So instead, I'm just going to copy this and put it here again, like so. That way I don't want to see anything. There we go. Okay. So what I want now is for this function to create our HTML. So instead of doing the return text here, we can just do it right here and just say return directly there. But maybe we may need to add or concatenate something in between. That's okay. So let's leave it as it is. So I'm going to use, because the problem with JavaScript is if I type a lot of text and hit enter like this, it's going to show this wonky thing because this is considered an error. But instead of using these double quotes, let's use the backticks like that. These are directly above your tab key. Use just next to number 1 there. Those are the backticks there. So I want to create some HTML here that we are going to use. So first of all, let me create a div. Let me leave some space here. I'm going to create a div like so. And then inside the div, I'm going to have an image tag. So you can create this HTML separately and then just come and paste it here. It's usually much better that way because you get the HTML privileges or suggestions when typing rather than what's happening now. So if let's say I had an h2 tag like so, and then in here I want to put a variable of this dot name, right? So everything I have to change here, I have to get from there, cut everything out from here like so, because I don't want the super runs only once, the constructor, it runs only once. So I want something that will run constantly to be grabbing the components there. So I'm going to paste them here. Okay, so all I can do now is just get the this.name and put it here as a variable. Now to put variables in JavaScript, when you use the backticks like that, you put a $, brackets, curly brackets, and put the variable there like so. Okay, and then I can use an h3 tag here like so, and then the address I can use just a normal span like so, and then h3, and then this one is age, and then this one is address like so. Okay, yes. So let me come back here and refresh the page. So now you see that we have that, and that. Okay, so that's a component there, but without some CSS. So let's see what happens when we try to add some CSS. Now in this case, if I do change, let me click on, oh, I don't have that on click listener anymore. So let me try and add it here and see if it actually works. So on click is equal to change event. Yes. So let's see if that works. Click. Okay, so that did not work. So I want us to be able to add an event listener there for a click. Okay, so what I will do here is let me add an ID to this one. The ID is going to be, oh, I can use a class name. That's doesn't really matter. I'll add name like that. And so how do I add an on-click listener here? Well, let me come back here for a second. Yeah, so what I will do here is have this connected callback. Now, connected callback is a function that runs the moment everything is connected. This class is connected to this. So once there's a connection between the two, then this function will definitely run. Oh, wait a minute. Before I even go to that, Let me refresh. Okay. Wait a minute. Okay, so the on-click there isn't working anymore, so it would seem. Okay, in any case, the connected callback happens when the connection is met. So which means by that time, these HTML elements are actually created. So then we can add an event listener to them. So for example, I want to add an event listener to this item here. So all I need to do is say this dot query selector. So I want to select an item from inside there. So I'm going to say this dot query selector, and what am I selecting? I want to select a let's say a div or something with an ID of name in there, like so. I'll set this to a variable. I'll just say var a is equal to, and then here I want to do a console.log a, so that we see what we have grabbed in there. So I'm going to refresh, and as you can see, I have managed to grab the h2 with an ID of name, which is this one in here. So let me explain a little bit, just in case you are getting lost what's going on here. What's happening is that we create this element here. So let me remove this on-click listener because I don't actually need that no more. So what's happening here is that we have this component created, but then we create a class to describe how this will work, okay, from the HTML. So then we define the class here and tell it, okay, connect those two things, connect the class to the item. And then once that connection happens, the constructor runs. So once the constructor runs, it's going to say this.innerHTML, which is when it says this, it means that the inner HTML, which is in between here, so this.innerHTML is equal to this.createHTML. So all I'm doing with this function createHTML is creating some HTML, just like it describes, and then we're going to shove that HTML in here. But then we'll use some variables in there. Now, where are these variables coming from? Well, we are grabbing the attributes from this item and using them as part of the HTML in there. Okay, so hopefully that is making some sense. And then when the connected callback happens, it means when those two things are connected, all I'm doing is I'm telling it to grab an item from inside the inner HTML of this. So I'm saying query selector from this, select an item with the ID of name, which is this one. And then I want to add an event listener to this very item. So I'm just going to say a.add event listener, like that. And how do you add an event listener? I'm listening for a click, like that, comma, function, put a function like that, open close bracket, like so. But then because we want to put a lot of code in there, we're going to separate those brackets there, like so. All right, and then now at this point, when there's a click, I want it to do a console.log and say clicked, like that, so that we know that it's actually working. So I'm going to come back here, refresh, and then click on this item. So you see now that it's showing me that item was clicked. It's able to recognize that. All right, so let's use that to change the value of one of the attributes in there, right? So all I can do now, let's see if it will actually work. So what I'm trying to do is get whatever I was doing with this function and do it in there instead. So we don't need this function no more. Outer here, out. Okay, so here we are back to connected callback. So instead of just telling us that it was clicked, I want us to actually manipulate this item here. Okay, so I want to change the name. So to do that, I'm going to set the attribute. So I'm going to say this dot set attribute. What attribute do I want to set? I want to set the name attribute, and I want to set it to button like I had done before. So let's see what errors we're going to get here, because I'm sure we will get a few. So I'll click here. Okay, so things are not working out. Let me inspect the element here. And wait a minute. Okay. So you see now what's happening here is that this H2 element is the one that's getting changed. Okay, that's the one that's getting changed here. So you see that it's setting an attribute name is equal to button here instead of setting this one here. So the description of this has changed because we are inside a function of a function. So because we went inside this function, they're outside the scope of the class. So this means something else. So this is talking about the item that was grabbed during the event itself, during this click event. So now if we don't want this kind of thing, right? It's a bit weird, though this is what happens. There are two ways to solve this problem. You can use the new notation here. Just remove that like so, and then put the equal sign like that, and then this should work. Let me see that. Refresh, and let's go to the console and let me click, and now you see that things are working just fine. Okay, because I've used this new version. But if you're the type that likes the old stuff and you don't want, or you find that new version confusing and you don't want to use it, that's okay. All you need to do is bind the this to make sure that it doesn't change its value. So we have to do just a few more changes. So here we'll have to create a new function, and I'm going to call this function, I don't know, it's a temporal function. We're going to remove it. So I'm just going to call it change, the way we had called it on the other side. So I'll put an E there, no big deal. And then I'm just going to cut this and paste it there. So this, blah, blah, blah. And then instead of all this now, because of how we have changed things here, we don't need, we just need to call this function here. So to call this function, I will say change, but it has to be this dot change. So let's see if things are working fine. Refresh, and then let's click. So it's still not working, but if I inspect, you see that I still have the same problem. Name is equal to button has been added to this item here, but because of what we have done here, we can now bind this here. I can just say dot bind this like so, and that will solve the problem. So come back here and refresh. Now if I click, button has changed. Okay, so this is for people who don't like using the other notation, but that notation kind of looks cool. So for now, I will leave it at that. Put everything back. Where were we? Oops, I think we are going overboard. So back here, and I will use the remove the word function and just put some arrows like that. An arrow, a single arrow like so. Refresh, click, everything is working. Okay, so that's one way of binding you this to make sure, in case you have such problems where you're adding an event listener and you're seeing things are not working as predicted, you can bind this to make sure that it's responding to this as in the class and not this the event. Okay, so now instead of wait a minute. So that's how you add events to all this. Now let's look at one major flaw here, one major problem. Okay, the major problem is with the styling, right? So we have the JavaScript here, we have our HTML, but our HTML can still be influenced by outside interferences. So if I come here, for example, and just add I add some styles for my span, I can just say color red, just so we can see it at work, and then background color blue, and then we're going to say display inline block, just so it looks like a block of some kind. We remove the inline version. So if I refresh now, you see that ooh, that's terrible. So you see that this has changed. It's been influenced by something on the outside. Okay. So the component is supposed to be self-contained. Now the problem is the HTML that is inside this class is being influenced by the outside. So we want to stop that, because we want to add our styles in here and not out here. Okay, so that way we can have it self-contained. So how can we do this to avoid this problem? Well, this is where this last function comes in, which is the shadow attacher. So right here, when things get connected, let's say connected callback, you can attach a shadow once things are connected. But I don't know, maybe I can attach it to the constructor. I think it usually works. Okay, so you type this, you say this.attach shadow, and then you put in a mode. Usually we leave it at open, but you can put it at closed if you don't want people to manipulate the insides of this. But usually you're going to leave it open. So this is an object. So this is equivalent to doing this and say var object is equal to that, like so, and then you just put your object there like that, because this is what do you call this, an object like this. Okay, but the shorthand is like that, of course, so let's leave it there. It looks nice and clean. So mode is equal to open this.attach shadow. So once we've attached the shadow, what we are doing is we're creating a very separate DOM inside this item, a DOM of its own, so that whatever we do inside that DOM does not affect the outside. All right, so what I'm going to do is, how do we use this DOM? So instead of just saying .innerHTML here, so everywhere where I'm saying .innerHTML, I can append the shadow. So I can say .shadow root, like so, .innerHTML. So now I'm adding items to the shadow root and not just the inner HTML of the normal DOM. I've created my own root DOM. So if I now refresh the page, it seems like nothing has changed at all, right? But things have changed, because now you see the CSS from outside is no longer affecting this guy here. But if I grab this styling here, I get it from there, cut it out, and then I come down here and paste, like so, right? Then now, if I refresh, you see that it has that effect. However, if I get this span right here, copy it and put it on the outside, let's say just outside this, you will see that the styles here are not affecting this one. So let's try this, refresh. You see that this text doesn't look like this. So there's no bleeding in between CSS styles. This is what the shadow is for. Okay, hopefully that is making some sense. All right, so now we can do our perfect styling here, because we can style everything from the inside over here without a problem. Yes, yes. So let's try and do that. So first of all, I'm just going to do the main div here. I'm going to say, because there's only one div here, so I think I can just write div and then add some stuff here. So for example, I can add background color, a light gray, and then I'm going to add a font family. I like Tahoma, and then you can either use Verdana or Tahoma, the two that I normally use. And then you can add a font size, 13 pixels, default font size, add a margin, auto, that way it can float in the center, but it will only float in the center if you give it an actual width. So I'm going to say width 100%, but that's not a number, so we need something like max width, which is maybe, I don't know, 300 pixels maybe. Let's add some border radius to have rounded corner. Radius, maybe 10 pixels. Let's add a box shadow so that we can have some shadowing. Let's try 0 pixel, 0 pixel, 10 pixel, a light gray. And then what else remains? Let's add some padding. Padding of 1 or maybe 0.5 m will do fine. Alrighty then, let's see what we have done so far. So if I do refresh, this looks a whole lot different from what we had there. So I'm thinking the text alignment should probably be in the center. And then the color, let's add it to a slight gray. Let me say, I don't know, 888. No, too low. 666. Let me remove this background color. Maybe I try EF just to lighten it up a bit. Okay, something like so. And then the width is too much, so let's reduce the max width to 250. Let's see where that holds. Okay, that's looking much better, much better. Maybe a white on the background is just better, you know, these things. I guess, maybe. So, goodbye. Still, this is too much, so I'll put 200. And then, here now, I can do image, right? IMG. And I can say width 180. No, let's just say 100%. Nah, 180 pixels. And then height 180 pixels. And then let's add a border radius 10 pixels. Let's add an actual border, which is a solid, thin, light gray, maybe 888, and a little margin of 4 pixels. Let's see how that looks. Okay, way too big. So let's try 150, 150, and then maybe the margin shouldn't be so big. Border radius could be 5, and then what else? Why is the border so weird? Hey, what have I done? I haven't saved, that's what. Alrighty then, so let me use... Okay, so this is what we have. We have a component here, but let's add some text here. For example, I'm going to say, let me remove this. I don't need that. I'm going to say name, age, address, and yeah, I think that's about it. Doesn't look so hot, does it? Let me remove the name there. I think the others are justifiable. Okay, All right, so let's make sure we have an image there to view. So if I do go to my drives here and try to find a profile image, actually, I want to find a profile image. Where are we? Ugh, this is a nightmare. People. So let me grab some of my favorite images here. I don't know why it's so hard to just choose an image. I want a JPEG and not I want a square image as well. You win. Copy that. Then let me open my open containing folder. So I want to paste the image here and just call it image.jpg, and that's what I will do here. So now, in order to make sure that I can view this image, all I need to do is add an image here, image tag, and just say image.jpg, like so. And so I need to add it as well to this list of listeners. So address, and then there will be image. And then also when grabbing these items, I will grab it here as well and say image, like so. And then I can put the image here. Copy that, put it there, and put image. Yes, yes. Now I can refresh, and there we go. So we have a successful component going on here. One component there. And if, for example, I need to change something with JavaScript, I can put a button here to, if I click here, let's see that. Inspect element. Oh, so that isn't working anymore because I've removed the function that was, it can't find it here. So the query selector can't find it. So instead, I'm going to grab the h2 instead. So I'll change this to h2, like so. And then now I think we'll be in business. So if I click, oops, what's happening? Let me go to the console and see if there are errors. Okay, so A is no. Why is A no? So what this means is that if A is no, it means it's not finding this item in here. But why is that? Query selector h2. Okay, let me go back here and put the ID is equal to name. Let's see if that actually still works. Refresh. So A is still no. But why? What's happening? Oh, sorry. Yeah, I completely forgot that I added a shadow DOM here. My bad. No big deal. So here, let's say h2. So this is where you have to be careful because this .query selector is no longer an option. So I have to use the shadow DOM. So I have to say this .shadow root like this .query selector. And then this .set attribute name button. Okay, that's all good. So let's see if that works now. Bam! And that's working. Okay, so don't forget, if you add an actual shadow root here, then even when selecting items from here, you have to look inside the shadow and not just on the inner HTML. So sometimes you can see the shadow. Yes. So let's zoom in a little bit here. And you see that there's this thing called shadow root here, which is open from within the user data element. Yeah. So it shows you what is inside the shadow root. So all of these items, as you can see here, this is what you see inside the DOM. So you just see this, and you just see the shadow root and user data clauses there. But the shadow, if I click here, all these items are inside the shadow now, even the styles. So that is proof that we are running inside a shadow. So now that we have this, how do you actually use this in a project? So I was going to use MySQL to read the data, but I think let's try without MySQL for now to avoid complicating things. Yeah. So the first thing I will do now is to convert this into an actual component separate from all this. So I'm going to see everything inside the script tag here, the class itself, everything up to the end where it says window.define, cut everything out from there, and then paste it inside a separate JavaScript file. So let me use Shift Tab to tab back like so. Okay, so there we go. Now some people use what is known as a template to add this HTML in here. No, not really a fan of the template tag, but you can use that if you want. It's okay, no biggie. Okay, so once we've added this in here, we have created a successful component. So all we need to do now inside the HTML tag, let me remove these script tags. Oh, I may use them later. So all we need is to add this here. So if, for example, I duplicate this a few times here, and I come here, if I refresh, nothing happens. Why? Well, that's because we forgot to include the class, the JavaScript. So do not forget to include the JavaScript and think it's not working. So the JavaScript file name is user.comp.js, right? But let me change this from type to source, like so. Okay. So this is what drives these guys. So refresh. So now, as you can see, these guys are in business. I have 3 of these items, but I want them to be side by side. So what do? Let me go back to my comp here and change how the display of the div is. So I'm going to change the display to inline block, inline block, and let me add a bit of margin because I see there's a margin top and bottom isn't very good. So I will say margin top. Where is this? Margin top 10 pixels. Maybe similar thing with margin bottom. Let me just add 5 like so. Bottom. There we go. Margin top and margin bottom. Refresh. There we go. So we have this going on. Not so great. Not so hot, is it? Okay, so let me remove this margin top and bottom. Let me just change the margin entirely to 10 pixels like that, so that there's no touching, because these guys seem to want to touch so much. Yeah, that looks much better. Now if I want to center this, of course I will have to do it in the by putting these guys inside a div, a separate div, like so. Okay, and then once they are inside a div, I can now tell them what to do by adding a style and saying text align center. Now this works because text has a display of inline. So if I set these guys to be a display of inline, then they kind of work like text. That's why text align center can center them. So let me come back here and refresh. Okay, so there we go. Right, so we have 3 items here which look very similar, not very useful, but if we change the items here, like John, Mary, and then we add different numbers here, I guess, and then we have different images. If we did, where are the images? Wow, we can get some images, can we not? Just so we have something better to look forward to. Let's see, how many square images do I have here? This one and this one. So copy, go back a couple of times and paste. I'll change them to image. So of course this one will be image 2 and this one image 3. So here I can change that by just saying image 2, image 3, like so. So if I change the parameters in here, I actually change what data the component will display predictably. Okay, so there it is. So 1 component, 2 component, 3 component. So what I want now is to use this to read from the database. Not a database, but let's use a let's create a JSON file and read from it. Okay, at this point you've already learned how to create a component. The remaining here is just to show you how you can actually utilize this, what's going on here. So what I want is to create some AJAX here so I can read from a file on the server. Now on the server, I'm going to create a file by just creating another file here, and I'm going to call this one data.json. Yes, JSON. Enter. So it's a JSON file. Now I need to create an object. So to create an object, you just put open and close curly bracket like so. But because I want to add many of these, so what I will do, anyway, it's not a big deal. I'll just say name like so. Let's create some data, shall we? So this one is going to be name full colon like this, and then how many names are there? I have no idea. Let's try John like so, and then put a comma, and then age, yes, I don't know, 24 maybe. Address full colon, plot number 1 2 3 4. Yes, so if you want to display this data in a more human readable format, you can do this. Just drop down where the commas are there like so. So you have a packet of data here, but I want more packets than this, so I'll be forced to put a comma here and do this. I want to drop this down even further, so let me do that, and let me add one more. I don't know, I can add as many as I want. So there's John, then we can have Mary, we can have Peter, and we can have that one, of course. Let me just put some random numbers here. Why is it always 34? Seriously. Okay. 12, and it ends up with 212. Right. Okay, so plot number, let's change a few numbers here just so the data looks random enough, like that. Now you can't have objects like this out in the open, so you need to cover them with an array. So put a square bracket at the, let's remove that and close that with a square bracket like so. And so we have some good data here which we can read. So this file is on the server. Let's go back to our index page and read that data. Okie dokie. So now what I want is to be able to receive the data, not automatically, but when I click a button. So I'm going to remove all this data that is in here. So you can put some placeholder data in there. That's entirely up to you. Yeah, you can just say something like loading maybe. So let's do this. I'll just say loading. Boop, boop, boop. Same thing here. Age, calculating. And then let's go here. Address. Let's remove all that. Who cares? And then this now we can yeah, I don't know, you can just leave it open like that. Okay, so now if I come back here and refresh, of course I see this loading, calculating, who cares, right? But let's read some data. So let's add a button that is going to read from our to read some of this data. Yes, yes, I agree. So let's put a button right inside here. I'm just going to add a button. I'll use an input of type button. Let me put a value, say get data. And then on the on-click event of this one, I want to run a function called get data. Like so. Put an event like that, even though it's completely unnecessary. And then here, let's run the function. So let's create a function in our script here. Function get data, unsurprisingly. So how do we get the data? Well, we want to read from the server. So to do that is very simple. We create an XML object HTTP request. So I'm just going to call it I don't know, AJAX. You can call it anything you want. New HTTP request. Yeah, now you're supposed to have XML at the beginning, like so. So once we have that object, now we can get some data from it. So I'm just going to say ajax.open. Let's open that item, and we're going to use, I don't know, get. It doesn't really matter. We can use get, we can use post. Irrelevant at this point, but maybe you can be, I can get you in the habit of using post instead. And then the name of the file that we want to read from, and that file is named data.json. And then let's use true so that we utilize the asynchronous nature of AJAX, and then we just say send, and that's it. But the question is, how do we get back our data? Well, let's add an event listener, so we listen to when the actual data comes back and do something about it. So add event listener. Add an event listener. What are we listening for? We're listening for the change. Oh wait, I'm confused now. We're listening for the onReady state change. So let's do ready state change. That's the event. And then what do we do when we find that? Let's run a function, shall we? Like so. And then in there, bam. Let's do that. And then we will only want to get the result if everything went well. So we are going to ask if ajax.status was equal to 200, which means the file was actually found on the server and is in good condition, or ajax.ready state, keep note of the capital letter there, is equal to 4, like so. Okay, so the AJAX has 4 stages. 0 means it's getting ready, 1 is opening, 2 I think is sending or something, then 4 means we have received data. So once we receive the data, for now let's just do a console.log so we can see the data, and that data is going to be housed in a value called response text, like so. Alrighty, boys and girls, let's give it a shot. Refresh. Well, get data needs to have some respect and not be in the same line as the content. So let's put a break tag there. Okay, so get data. Now I'm going to open my console. So in readiness, to see this awesomeness when it comes back. So if I click, as you can see here, I have gotten the data that I want, exactly as nature intended. So let me come back here. So what do we do with that data? So the data is a string, but we can convert it to an actual object. So how do we do that? Well, not to fear. We would do that by saying var, I want to create an object, is equal to JSON, capital letter like that, JSON.parse. That's how we deal with JSON data. Why did I remove the response text? Ugh, now I have to type it again. Okay, there we go. So now that we have an object, I'm just going to say if object, meaning things went well. Let's loop through that object, shall we? So I'm going to say for var key in object, like so. That's how you loop through an object. So for every time we loop in this object, we assign our key to that. So all I need now is to go through these babies here and get the data. Once I get the data from them, I can change it. Yes. So let's see how we can modify that sweet data. So these guys have a very distinct, what's this? Tag name, right? So let me grab them by the tag name. So I'm going to say here, oopsie, how do I do this now? Wait a minute. Okay, so instead of grabbing these items here, what I should do is delete them, actually. Oh, sad to see these guys go, but that's the reality. So I'm going to cut one of these and delete these boys. What I want to create instead is a div that will house them. So another div of a div of a div. I'm going to give this div a class of, I'll use JS just so I know that I'm using this for JavaScript, JS data. So come here and grab that. So say var data div be equal to document dot query selector, and I want to find the dot, because it's a class, JS data. So once I've grabbed it, I can just add to it. So I will say every time I loop here, I'm just going to say data div dot inner HTML. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, there are many ways to do this, but let's just use inner HTML instead of create element, because that will just open another can of worms, which I don't want to go into. So I'm just going to put the backticks like so I can add some variables, and then I'm going to paste these baby. I'll do that, and bam, there we go. So I want to add, I'll use a plus here because I want to add to the inner HTML. First of all, before I do that, I need to clear everything that is inside that. So .inner HTML is equal to empty string. Okay, then add to it. Now here, instead of name there, I'm going to put a $, like so, and then get from the object. So the object right here, the current, oh, wait a minute, this is not right. Okay, I've seen my mistake here, but not to worry, I shall fix it. So what I've forgotten here is that inside that data there's an array, and then there's objects inside an array. So it's an array of objects. So I'm looping through the object here, but not through the array. So let me loop through the array as well. So I'm going to use a for loop, just an ordinary for loop, and in here I'm going to say Why did I call it object anyway? Let me just call it array, AAR, like that. So I'm going to do that. Let's say AAR, change that to AR. Okay. So looping through that, then all I need to do is put the other loop inside this loop. So let me explain why I'm doing this. Let me go back to the JSON data. So this is an array of items. So there's array on location 0 there's this, on location 1 there's this, location 2 there's that, but inside here there's also kind of like an array, but it's an object because it's got named values and named keys here. That's why it's an object, but it's kind of an array as well. It's got 1, 2, 3 items. So I need to loop through these items as well, but I may not need to do that actually. Let me come back to the text here. Let's just loop through the array for now. Let me remove the looping through the object itself. I think it's unnecessary. So why that is because I can go directly and get, I know the key names, right? So I can use that. I know that there's a .name, .age, and .address, so no need to loop through those babies. So we just use a normal loop here and then use array i.name, like so, and copy that so we can speed things along. Paste, and let's change that to age, and then speed things along again by pasting. Let's change that bad boy to address, and let's change this one to image. Now image I did not create here, so my bad. Let me duplicate each one of these. Boom. Yeah, the only reason they're showing that is because I didn't add commas here, so make sure you add your commas and eat your vegetables. Okay, so here address, yes, change to image, and then this one will be image.jpg. I should have just copied this. Why did I have to so forth? Oops, wrong. Paste, put 2. Paste, put 3. I don't have a 4th image, so I'm just going to repeat image 1, like so. And I think that should do it. So once I load, it's empty, and then say get data, bam, the data is there. Who knew? And here it's telling me undefined. Well, the reason is simple. That's because I'm using a capital N here for some reason. I have no idea why. So let me just remove the capital N here and put small letter n, because that's what I'm looking for here. These things are case sensitive. So yeah, refresh, nothing, click load. So that's how you can load data from your database, right? Now if I just want to load just a few of these items, not every single piece of data, then I can limit where this is going. I can say length -2, like so, for example. Then I can remove 2 items from this, refresh, get data, and only 2 items will show. So you can use the same technique to load data from the database. The only thing important to remember here is that once you change the data inside this, like for example name, age, and so on, you can change the content of the item there. So before we close down, let me show you just one way of doing next, previous, next, and so on, just to use one component here to change the data that is involved. So let's just do that very quickly as a last thing. All right, so before we go to that, let's do a quick recap so that in case you're confused what's going on, maybe this might clear it up. So what we are doing here is we created a component which is self-contained in here, And every time we type user data here, it's recognized as one of the components there. So if here for some reason I typed something like, I put user data. Oh, and one thing I forgot, your custom elements always need to have a hyphen in there. It doesn't work any other way. It's going to produce an error. So you should always have two words like this every single time. Otherwise it doesn't work. So let me close that. So once I say user data like this, that's enough to display something. So let me refresh, and you see there's an empty shell there, right? The moment I did that. So now it's recognized as an actual element in HTML. It's an actual HTML element now that contains this information here. Okay, only that this is no, that is no, and so on. But when I clicked, it actually worked there. The reason is because I didn't set some default values here, which I could have done if I wanted to. If these things do not exist, I can simply check here this dot name once I try to get it, and then if it returns no, then I can put in a placeholder. Okay, like for example, I can say if not this dot name, right? If that didn't work out, what do? We say this dot name is equal to, maybe we can use unknown, yeah, like we don't know the name of this human. So that way I'm setting a default value which will show up there, just in case there's nothing to show for it. But if I come back to my index page, and the moment I type name here, add an attribute and say girl, for example, like that, it's going to grab that and actually show it there. So this has become a full-blown element now. I can put age like that, and it's going to show the information one by one. And if I put image as well, it's going to do likewise. So this is what we've been doing. That's what makes components quite powerful. Okay, so now let's see how we can use the data that we're retrieving. Instead of adding multiple components, I just want to be able to change the data using next, previous to change the data here, to swap the data. So that's not a big deal either. All I need to do here is, let me remove that. So you can save this and open a different system, a different file in order to do this. Let me copy this. So what I will do here is I will, I don't know here, what do I do? Okay, no big problem. So here I'm going to say JS data like that, put that there like so. And then all this I will remove and just leave some empty spaces like so. Okay, okie dokie. Now there's a button here. I want to add two buttons. So this button will be previous and this one will be next, like so. Okay, so next and previous, get data, we'll put that in the middle. So let me refresh. Okay, so this is what I have. I have next, I have previous. Now the reason I click here is because they have the same event listener here, which is get data. So let me remove these two. So instead what I will say is I'll put next here, and then here I'll put previous. Those will be the names of the functions. So we don't have those functions here yet, so that's okay. So what I need to do here now is I'm going to remove this. I don't need this no more. So instead of removing it, just in case you may need it for future use, I will comment it out like this so that it's no longer functional, like that. Okay, and then I'll remove this -2 here so that I get to run through all of them. All right, and now what I need here at the very top is a variable that will tell me what number I need to get, right? So I will say var ID. Let's just use that as an ID. ID is equal to 0. Okay, so let's use 0 for now. And then every time we click this, there's what we need to do is change the let me come back here. Let's make those functions, right? The next and the previous. So I'm just going to say function next, function prev, and then in these ones all I need to do is say ID next is ID plus plus, like that. Just increment ID, that's all. Okay, now I know that the items are 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, so I need to know it's 0 to 3, so I need to know that it's not bigger than 3. So if ID is greater than 3, then ID will be equal to 0. Okay, simple and straightforward. Let's do the same thing here, but we'll do it in reverse. So it's minus minus. If it's less than 0, then ID is equal to 3. That way we keep looping whether we click next or. And then after that, now we say get data. Now we don't have an event here, or do we? Yes, we do have an event. So I'll put E there and E there. So now I'm simply going to say get data, like so, and then get data, like so. So yeah, in both cases we are getting the data, but we're just changing what the ID is. Then we can use that ID here to determine what to show. So first of all, the div was taken from here, which is this one. Now I don't want to replace what's inside the div. I just want to deal with the first child here. So I could have done a query selector to select this one, but I'm just going to say this div dot child is 0 because there's only one child here. The very first one is this one, and then I'm going to change the attributes in there one by one. So all I need to do here is just come here and say if I be equal to the ID up there, then this is the correct thing to display. So once I do this, all I need to do now is say data div dot children 0, which is the first child, dot set attributes. So I'm just going to set the attributes of this guy. For example, I'm going to set the one for the name. What will I set it to? Let me put my semicolon there, and then I will just drop in this guy over there. So do the same thing for all these. Name, oops, age, and then address, and then finally image, and that's it. So let's see that in action, shall we? So if I click next, I'm suspecting there is an error. So type error, div.children is undefined. But why? So JS data, query selector, that one. Oh, that's because I'm emptying things in there before I try to do anything. So remove that guy there. Very stubborn. Refresh. Okay. Fingers crossed, things will work this time. So click next. There we go. Next. 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 So you see how web components can be very useful like this. They're sort of self-contained in there. Okay, so I really hope you have learned something new in this tutorial. If you have, leave a thumbs up to the video and subscribe. Consider subscribing, and please share the videos so that I can get more subscribers and make more videos. Yes, all right, so I will see you next time.